So having identified the options of setting strategy, let's talk a little bit more about that process of strategy. And Johnson and Scholes talked about the idea of being three elements, but not in a straight line, but sort of overlapping circles of elements. So a nice handy acronym for you there, CIA, being choice, implementation and analysis. So from the choice perspective, we've got to decide what our strategy is. From an implementation perspective, we've got to decide how we're going to do it. And then from an analysis perspective, we've got to understand the impact of that around the ecosystem, which is everything around the organisation itself, the supply chain, the culture of that industry. So we said it's not a straight line. You don't start here and then go here and here, which is what we saw with rational planning. So rational planning was very much, here is my mission, here is my corporate appraisal, and here are my ideas on bridging that gap. So it is a different idea around how we're going to make that work. Yeah, we could really start with the emotion of saying, what's the opportunity? And we said that there are some companies that will do that. They will look at opportunities as and when they present themselves. There are other opportunities, or other organisations who are far more likely to say, actually, let's start with the review of the position. What's happening in the market, what's happening in the industry, what's my internal position in terms of strengths and weaknesses. And there are other organisations who are actually already making choices and then going back and saying, how's that work back to the ecosystem and how does that work based on the choices that I make? So in summary, when you're looking at this with Johnson & Scholes, what you're really saying is, actually, there is no best way to set strategy. So as long as you've got the right people and the right culture, then actually the strategy is far more likely to work. We mentioned the term ecosystem. Let's talk a little bit more about what that is. So if you imagine what an ecosystem is in the natural world, so it's insects, it's animals, it's birds, it's plants, all of which support each other. So effectively, it's a food chain. And what happened was in the 1990s, a writer, James Moore, a strategy writer, said that concept works if you apply it to the business world. He actually wrote a very interesting article called Predators and Prey. That idea that there are some organisations that are the predators, there are others that are at the bottom of the food chain. Now, why did it come out in the 1990s? Because actually in the 1990s, that's when we really started to see the advances both in technology, but also in the way organisations worked collectively. And, Moore's idea is the fact that as the environment is changing so quickly, rather than thinking about yourself in isolation, actually just think of yourself as part of this bigger picture that, you are not in isolation. No organisation actually exists in a vacuum. So you are always looking at the impact across a number of different areas. So definition then, it's a community, but it's an economic community rather than potentially a natural community. And ultimately, those customers are part of the ecosystem. So they are people who are taking whatever products or services that you are providing. But it's also the supply chain within that, so suppliers, producers, etc. And gradually what you're going to start to see is that effectively you're dynamically interacting with other members of that ecosystem. That old idea where you sit there and go, well, there's me and there's my suppliers and they're probably trying to, exploit me in some way. That doesn't work anymore. There are developed patterns of behaviour that we can all work within that ecosystem, whatever that ecosystem would actually be. Everybody is both affected and affects other people, so that the relationships that we're in are constantly evolving over time. Now, if you've got a strong ecosystem, the stronger the ecosystem, actually what you'll tend to find is the fewer new entrants will come in, because they might not know what the ecosystem is. It's a barrier to entry, because either you've got to do it better than everybody else, or at best you've just got to do the same and then compete for the grounds that you started later on in a process. That does mean we can share technology, and in some sectors, so automotive design, car design, you will find that some of those big key players, Renault, Nissan, for example, work as part of that ecosystem and will share technology, and they will share components. Those components may well be spread across other manufacturers as well. So it's just recognition of the fact that the world is changing quickly, and we are going to have to work to be able to do that. One of the things just to focus on that is the fact that, leadership will evolve as well as part of that ecosystem change. So what constitutes a good leader may be different as the ecosystem evolves. Why is this in a chapter based on strategy? Well, if your ecosystem is changing and the players in that ecosystem are evolving, you can't see strategy as a one-off. So you don't sit there and go, right, well, that's it, tick. That's the strategy done for the next 3 years, because it's constantly changing. So you've always got to be thinking the decisions that we make today, how does that work with the others in that sector, with the others in the organisation's ecosystem? If you take that analogy back to the natural world, let's see how that works. One of the things that's happening in the UK at the moment is that there are concerns over the future of bees. Now, if bees aren't there, then we've got no pollination. If we've got no pollination, then it's going to be very difficult for things to grow, crops, flowers, whatever it happens to be. Why have we got that? Well, some of it is due to external positions, so more pesticides equals fewer bees. Some of that may also be the fact that the weather is changing, so climate change having an impact on different parts of the ecosystem. And sometimes it's the actions of other players in that ecosystem. If, however, the bees are left to die, then that's going to be a real challenge, and we're going to be in a situation where the society is going to struggle to get certain things, and what you then start to see is a change of patterns of behaviour. Now, I'm a keen gardener. I love my garden. And when I go and buy seeds, there are certain varieties of seeds that are now marketed as being bee friendly. So actually people are taking action to try and reverse that trend. If you imagine that the bees now aren't bees, they're part of a company. Now all of the time they are then looking at those strategies. So is there something we can do to deal with pesticides? Is there something we can do to deal with competitors? Is there something we can do to do with the change in the external environment? And that's how the two things fit together. Again, that concept of recognising that anything I do will have an impact in a wider position.